Welcome to another wonderful Susanna Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susanna Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Unwelcome Christmas Bride. Chapter 1. Nellie, go on and take out Sarah's order. It's been sitting here for ages, Mrs. Price, the head cook, called out. Nellie reluctantly stepped away from the stove and proceeded to follow the other cook's orders. Before swinging open the door that separated the kitchen area from the dining area, she straightened her apron, ruffling it around her hips in an effort to appear slimmer. She picked up the 2 plates brimming with beef and potato stew and hurried out through to the tables, keeping her eyes cast downward. Sarah, who should have been serving customers, sat at a table across from 2 gentlemen, all of them engrossed in conversation. Every so often, she threw her head back and laughed. Big Abel, the proprietor of the inn, stood at the rear of the establishment, his eyes taking in everything, including his waitress conversing with the guests. It irked Nellie that he didn't seem to mind Sarah shirking her responsibilities, which meant that more and more often, Nellie was called from her cooking duties to serve customers. Not for much longer, Nellie promised herself. With her lips pressed together, Nellie approached the table and set the plates in front of each of the men without making eye contact. She had long ago learned that making herself invisible lessened the crude remarks from male customers. "Me and you are gonna have ourselves a great time," one of the men was telling Sarah. Sarah giggled. Nellie stifled a wave of disgust. She didn't understand the waitress who had only been at the hotel for a couple of months. Sarah played around with the coarse men who visited the establishment as though it was all a game to her. Nellie had no idea if she met with them after work, but because of that possibility, Nellie kept well away from the waitress's overtures of friendship. "How about you, pretty lady? How long since you had some real lovin'?" Nellie stiffened. "What's wrong with her? Don't mind her. She's a church girl," Sarah said, and the 3 of them broke into raucous laughter. Nellie turned and fled. Back in the safety of the kitchen, she gripped the counter, trying to get her breathing back to normal. Humiliation flooded her body. She knew it could have been worse. Just the week before, a man had grabbed her backside as she walked through the dining area balancing 4 plates of food. "What is it, honey?" Mrs. Price asked. At the kind words of concern, tears sprang in Nellie's eyes. "Nothing." She sniffed. "Some of those men are, well, they're rude." Mrs. Price sighed. "This is no place for a soft heart such as yours. Add to that the body our good Lord blessed you with and this place is trouble. Ignore them rascals and just remember why you're here, to earn a living like the rest of us." "I know. You're right." Nellie's eyes prickled with fresh tears, as she remembered the safety of the orphanage where she had been less than 6 months earlier. If only they had allowed her to stay. The day she had turned 18 was the day she left the orphanage. It had not been a perfect life there, but at least in the orphanage, she had never once encountered advances from men. "How is it with your gentleman in Wyoming?" Mrs. Price said, breaking into Nellie's thoughts. Nellie's face grew warm at the mention of Thomas Miller, the gentleman from the West she had been communicating with. He had sent her 2 letters thus far, the first acknowledging her response to his advert, and the second telling her all about himself. He was a banker in Plum River, Wyoming, but from the colorful letters he wrote, Nellie thought he ought to be a writer. "It's been 2 weeks since I received a letter from him," Nellie said, the quiver in her voice revealing her anxiety. "2 weeks ain't nothing. I hear it takes as much as a month for a letter to make its way from that backwater." Nellie giggled. "It's not a backwater. Thomas tells me of the beautiful rolling hills and the herds of cows that graze in the deep grass that stretches as far as the eye can see." Mrs. Price snorted and turned back to the counter. "I hope it's just taking longer than usual," Nellie said to the cook's back. A day later, the long-awaited letter arrived. Mail was usually dropped at the counter of the hotel, so Mrs. Price was the one who saw Thomas's letter when she returned from her weekly market visit. "Here you are, told you it would come," she said as she handed Nellie the letter. Nellie's hands trembled as she took the plain white envelope with Thomas's neat, almost feminine, handwriting on the front of it. "Go on, take a few minutes and read it. I know you won't be getting any work done as long as that letter remains unread." Nellie beamed and murmured her thanks. She wandered to the corner of the room where they kept a chair handy for quick breaks during the day. Carefully, she peeled open the envelope and slid out the contents. The first thing she saw was a train ticket. She gasped, which made Mrs. Price hurry to her. "He sent a ticket, Mrs. Price," Nellie cried. She held the ticket against her bosom and closed her eyes. She would be there at Christmas time, as a married woman. Ain't the Lord wonderful? Mrs. Price dusted her hands on her apron. She reached for Nellie's train ticket, and as she studied it, her eyes grew wider. "Why, this says you're to travel in 2 days' time. That don't give Big Abel much time to find a replacement cook." Nellie's spirits fell. "I'm sorry. I'm selfish, thinking of myself only. What will you do? You can't do all the cooking yourself." Mrs. Price stared at Nellie thoughtfully. "I have a niece, and she ain't doing nothing at the present. My sister asked me for help in finding her a position. I'm not too keen about taking her on, as she's rather lazy, but perhaps working here will change her." Nellie's eyes welled up. "I can't thank you enough. I would hate to leave with bad blood between Big Abel and myself. Don't mention it, honey. Besides, if there's anyone who deserves this, it's you. That Thomas fella had better treat you right. He's a lucky man." The rest of the day whirled by. Mrs. Price was kind enough to tell Big Abel that Nellie was leaving and that she had a replacement for her. In the evening, as they were preparing to close, Big Abel came to her holding an envelope. "Mrs. Price tells me we won't be seeing you again," he bellowed in his normal loud voice. Nellie nodded. "You been the best worker a person could hope for. If you ever need to come back, your position will always be here." He handed her the envelope. It seemed as though Nellie had done nothing but cry all day. She clutched the envelope and mumbled her gratitude, a tight throat making her unable to speak. Chapter 2. "What time did you say she's coming?" Thomas Miller asked his sister. "On the 2 o'clock train," Laurie said with her back to him as she pounded dough. Thomas glanced at his pocket watch. It was half an hour before 2 o'clock, but the train depot was a few miles from Laurie's house. "I best be going then." His sister turned around, her eyes scrutinizing him from head to toe. "You might want to change into something a bit more," she seemed to struggle to find the correct words. "Spiffy?" Thomas prompted, and they both laughed. Rather than argue with her, Thomas nodded and left the kitchen to the room he occupied under the eaves. It was a Saturday, and after spending his work days in the bank, he liked to dress more relaxed during the weekend. He ignored the suits hanging in his wardrobe and instead picked a pair of clean slacks and a checkered shirt. Minutes later, he had hitched his gelding to the buggy, and they were moving toward the depot in no rush, as he still had a bit of time before the arrival of the train. He hadn't given much thought to this friend of Laurie's who was coming to visit. He had only paid attention when Laurie requested him to pick her up from the depot. Now, he racked his memory for her name. He remembered it started with an N. Nellie Wilder. Yes, that was it. Laurie had insisted he would know her right away, as she had very blonde hair and would be wearing a blue travel suit and a brown coat. As soon as he dropped the woman at the house, he would change back into his well-worn clothes and return to the forest where he had been helping out his brother-in-law by cutting wood in preparation for the winter. At the depot, Thomas secured the buggy and entered the crowded station. He stood against the wall, where he had a good view of the entire platform. Moments later, a faraway roar got louder as the train drew closer. As it barreled into town, it whistled and blew huge puffs of steam high into the air. Thomas watched as people got off the train and gleefully embraced their loved ones. It crossed his mind just how far back it had been since he had felt any kind of joy. Too long to remember, he decided. A young woman with impossibly blonde hair, nearly white it was, got off the train and stood on the platform looking all around. Thomas stood up straighter, his eyes on the woman. He strode toward her, and when she turned and their eyes met, his step faltered. Glorious eyes. Bluer than summer clouds with impossibly long lashes. Eyes that made his heart stutter. He studied the rest of her as she stood. Small waist and strong arms. Curvy body and ample hips. His mouth went dry. It had been a long time since he'd admired a woman. He cleared his throat and smiled, which was not difficult faced with such beauty. "Good day to you," Thomas said and tipped his hat. "Are you Nellie Wilder?" Another second passed as they gazed at one another. Thomas experienced a myriad of emotions as he waited for her answer. She was a complete stranger, and yet, as he looked into her eyes, something that had died with his dear Flora awoke and came back to life. Her face broke into a smile that made the rest of the world fade away. "Yes, I am, and you must be Thomas Miller," she said, and to his surprise, she extended a hand and gently touched his arm. Unnerved by her familiarity, as they had never met, Thomas smiled cautiously. He reckoned Laurie had spoken to her friend about him so much that she felt she knew him. "Let's get your baggage," he said and led her to the baggage car. "I can't tell you how excited I am to be here," Nellie Wilder said. He helped her locate her bags, and then they strolled back to his buggy. Nellie's lovely eyes were wide as she took in her surroundings. "It's certainly a little different from the towns I know, but I'll get used to it in time." "Do you intend to stay?" Thomas asked politely, half hoping she'd say yes. Her blue eyes widened as she took in his question. What?" she asked, her voice stuttering. "I assumed." "What are your plans?" Thomas shook his head, perplexed. What was she talking about? His plans for what? She leaned closer, after they both sat on the driver's bench of the buggy. "You seem to be of two minds, Thomas. In your last letter, you did propose, and I said yes. I don't understand why you would ask me whether I intend to stay." Thomas's heart fell to his feet. His chest tightened as it dawned on him what was going on. Laurie. It had to be. There could be no other possible explanation. Things which hadn't made sense at the time now did. Laurie asking him what he thought of men who advertised for a wife. Laurie insisting that he needed to marry again and get on with his life. His vision clouded as rage swept through him. "Thomas?" He could barely speak. "I didn't send you any letters," he stammered through clenched teeth. Nellie gasped. "But you did. I have them right here." She dipped her hand into her drawstring bag. In one fluid movement, Thomas covered her hand with his, halting her movements. "I think my sister Laurie has been writing to you, pretending to be me. She reckons it's time I took a wife, and without my permission or approval, went ahead and took matters into her own hands." He shook his head. "I reckon I better see the handwriting." She held out the letters with a trembling hand. With one glance, Thomas recognized his sister's handwriting. He blew out his breath and looked at Nellie. The spark which had lit her blue eyes only a few minutes earlier was gone. She sagged against the back of the bench. His own anger ebbed away. Remorse filled him as he watched her. She seemed to have forgotten his presence. A slim hand went to her forehead and rubbed circles around it. "I'm really sorry about this," he began. His words seemed to snap her back to the present. She straightened her back and contemplated him with unblinking eyes. "I shall book the next train back to Boston," she said, her voice shaky. "But you've just arrived," Thomas found himself saying, even though it would be best for her to go back home. Laurie would be disappointed, and besides, the next train doesn't depart until tomorrow. He noticed the sheer exhaustion on her face. Her eyes were hollow now and shadowed circles surrounded them. "All right," she said, her voice low and defeated. His heart constricted with remorse, but there was nothing to be done. They were both victims of Laurie's thoughtless actions. His anger welled up again as his hands tightened on the reins. Chapter 3. The abrupt halt told Nellie they had reached their destination. She must have dozed off for a minute in her total exhaustion. "She's here," a female voice cried out. Every bit of her ached. Her head pounded and the small action of opening her eyes increased the pain. She straightened and found herself looking into a pair of dancing green eyes. "I thought you'd never get here," the woman said. "My name's Lori, and you must be Nellie Wilder. How pretty you are." Nellie stiffened. Lori was the cause of all her problems. "Yes, I know who you are. Thomas told me what must have happened," Nellie said, her tone curt and disappointed. Lori stepped back as though she had been slapped. Her right hand flew to her chest. "Oh dear. I never wanted you to find out like this. I'm so sorry." "Lori, I must have a word with you," Thomas stated. Lori shot Nellie an apologetic smile and stepped back to speak with her brother. The bench Nellie was sitting on suddenly became unbearably hard and uncomfortable. Stiffly, she climbed down. She faced a whitewashed two-story clapboard house, with a wide front porch and sashed windows. Tears flooded her eyes at the sight. In her dreams of her very own home, she had envisioned just such a place. The front door burst open and a brown-haired boy cautiously stepped out, followed by a younger girl who could only be his sister. They stared at her, bright-eyed and curious. Just then, Lori came bristling from behind the buggy. "Come on in, Nellie. I know you must be starving and tired," she said. "Someone will bring in your baggage." "I can do it, Ma," the boy offered. Lori took Nellie's arm and guided her toward the entrance. "This is my boy, Caleb. He's 10 years old and fancies himself a grown man. This here is Peggy. Tell Miss Nellie how old you are, dear." The girl threw her shoulders back before speaking. "I'm 7 years old." In spite of the awkward situation, Nellie stifled a chuckle, saying, "You're a very big girl." "I help Ma with the dishes and the house," Peggy bragged. Nellie followed Lori through the front door that opened up into a square hallway. Behind her, the little girl chatted. She was as talkative as her mother, Nellie thought, without taking in much of what she was saying. Her mind was numb from the shock of how she'd been duped, and she could hardly put one thought in front of the other. "Sit yourself down," Lori said, pulling a chair from the kitchen table. Nellie gratefully sank into the offered chair. "Ma says Uncle Thomas is gonna marry you," Peggy quipped as she rested her hands on the table, her brown eyes on Lori. Peggy, her mother scolded, turned around from the stove. "Go on, skittle out of here. Change out of your Sunday clothes and go play, both you and your brother." "But Ma," Caleb protested as he set Nellie's bags down. Lori pointed a finger toward the door. "Now." "I'm sorry," Lori said after the children had left. "I seem to be doing everything wrong." Her voice broke, and Nellie looked up. Lori's hands hung by her sides in a helpless gesture that tugged at Nellie's heart. "It's all right," Nellie said, knowing that in truth, nothing was right. But her words seemed to satisfy Lori. She gave Nellie a smile before busying herself serving thick slices of smoked bacon, boiled potatoes, and steaming sourdough biscuits. Nellie's tummy growled at the sight of food, and for the next 10 minutes, she ate steadily, her attention on the delicious meal. "Thank you so much," Nellie said when she was finished, dabbing at the sides of her mouth with a napkin. "That was very tasty." "You're welcome," Lori said, grinning at her from across the table. "A cup of tea will wash it down well." While they were sipping their tea, Lori brought up the subject of Thomas. "I believe I owe you an explanation," Lori began. "My brother, well, he has had a very difficult year since Flora died. It's been tough on all of us, really. But he's been miserable. Flora was carrying their first child when she got trampled over by a wild horse." Nellie gasped. The image was so disturbing, it took away the enjoyment of her tea and she pushed it away. "It was awful," Lori said. "It gave all of us bad dreams for weeks. Anyway, we asked him to move in here with us. His house held too many memories of Flora, and we didn't think it was doing him much good. It's been over a year now, and I reckoned it was time for him to move on. I knew he wouldn't agree with me, so I took out an advert myself and replied to your letters as Thomas. He's a good man. Truly, he is, and I have a feeling the two of you are right for each other." Laurie's eyes pleaded with her for understanding. Nellie slowly nodded. She could well understand Laurie's actions to help her brother, but still, where did that leave her? Thomas just needs some time to get to know you, Laurie added quickly. He told me you plan on leaving tomorrow. Please don't go. Not yet. Stay with us, and we'll see what happens. I assure you that Thomas will come around. Thomas will come around? Nellie cringed. She hardly wanted a husband who would come around. I can't go back tomorrow even if I wanted to. My funds are not enough to purchase a ticket back to Boston, Nellie said, her voice dull. Laurie beamed. I know it all seems dismal to you right now, but our Lord brought you here for a purpose, and that's to be Thomas's wife. The Lord brought her? Nellie hardly thought so. It was Laurie who had brought her, and that fact could hardly be ignored. Nellie shook her head. Laurie's plan was faulty at best. And what if he doesn't change his mind? Laurie inhaled sharply. Then I shall give you the fare myself to return home. Christmas will be upon us soon. Wouldn't you like to celebrate Christmas here in the West? Nellie considered this, knowing she hadn't much choice. Laurie seemed nice enough, if she ignored her deceptive shenanigans. At least, Nellie could enjoy getting to know her while she stayed. And Christmas out there might be nice. Nellie took a long, slow breath. She would stay through the holidays, and if nothing happened between her and Thomas, she would return to Boston. Big Abel had promised that her position would be waiting for her if she ever returned. She grimaced. When Big Abel had told her that, she'd never dreamed she'd have to take him up on his offer. Chapter 4. Nellie woke to the low winter sunlight filtering in through the curtains. Sounds of crows calling reminded her sharply of where she was, and her spirits instantly fell. What was she going to do? She had hinged all her hopes for the future on Thomas. And he didn't want her. She gazed around the small cozy room where she'd slept. How long would she be here until she had to return to Boston? Because right then, she had a hard time believing that she'd make it till Christmas. Laurie's invitation to stay and then pay her way home later didn't soothe her mood. She'd come to get married. To start a new life. She'd put all her hopes and dreams into this trip. But she'd seen the horrified look in Thomas's eyes when he realized she'd come as his uninvited mail-order bride. The warmth he had welcomed her with had immediately fled, replaced by a cold wall. She sat up and sniffed. It wouldn't do to sit in bed feeling sorry for herself. She had gone through other difficulties and this too would pass, she told herself. She dragged her still aching body from bed and splashed water on her face from the basin on the bedside table. She felt marginally better after cleaning herself up and putting on a fresh brown dress. Looking down at her work dress, she contemplated wearing something brighter but instantly dismissed the thought. As soon as Laurie had told her what happened to Thomas's wife, Thomas's behavior made sense. He was grieving for his wife and was not ready to marry another woman. Nellie could hardly present herself in a forward way. The house was quiet as she padded down the hallway, through the front room and to the kitchen. Laurie was nowhere to be seen. Nellie pushed open the back door and blinked at the assault of bright light on her eyes. She saw Nellie then, hanging clothes on the line even in the cold. When had the woman done the wash? How early did she rise? Around Laurie were 4 hens and a rooster scratching and pecking the earth. Further on, in a small fenced pasture, was a black and white cow. The sight of the cow warmed her heart. In the orphanage, there had been a tiny herd of cows, and Nellie had helped milk them since she was 12 years old. Good morning. Sorry I overslept, Nellie called out when she neared the other woman. Laurie whirled around and smiled at her. Good morning, yourself. I expected you to sleep a little longer. I've always woken up early, Nellie rushed on. I feel like a lazy bones. I should have awakened to help you prepare breakfast. Laurie waved away her apology. You needed your rest after that journey. Thomas has already left for the bank. Nellie nodded. She was glad she didn't have to face him that morning. It was shameful to know you were unwanted. Does she have a name? Nellie asked, gesturing to the cow who contentedly nibbled on the grass. Laurie beamed. As a matter of fact, she does. The children named her Bessie. She laughed. Not a very original name, to be sure. But that good old girl keeps me busy and provides us with our milk. It's nigh on to 11 now. Will it be lunch or breakfast? 11? Nellie flushed with embarrassment. How in the world had she slept so long? I'll wait for lunch. Let me help you with the clothes. You have quite a pile to hang. Laurie grimaced. Don't you want to fetch a heavier coat? It's downright cold out here. But I'd love your help. There's always a lot of washing to be done. With the two women working together, it was not long before the 3 lines were full of wet flapping clothes. You have a lovely home, Nellie commented as they returned to the house. Thank you. You should see the ranch Thomas built for Flora. Fit for a queen and so big. It's a shame she never got to enjoy it for long. But thank the Lord, you're here. Soon, it will be filled with the sounds of your children. Nellie inhaled sharply. At the image of Thomas and his late wife in their sprawling ranch, her heart constricted with an emotion she had no right to feel. Am I rambling on too much again? My husband Simon says I talk too much and end up saying the wrong thing. Nellie looked at her wide eyes and burst out laughing. Laurie was good and kind underneath all her chatter. Where is he? Your husband? He was not at supper yesterday, Nellie said, deftly changing the topic. It had been just her, Laurie, and the children. Thomas, too, had disappeared, and by the time they retired for the night, he still had not come back. Simon's a traveling salesman selling farming tools. He's often gone from home for weeks at a time, Laurie explained, her voice flat. You must miss him very much. I do. I know I have to be strong, but sometime it gets mighty lonely. Laurie promptly linked her hand with Nellie's. Not used to physical displays of affection, Nellie fought the urge to pull her hand away, knowing it would hurt Laurie. I'm glad you're here. I miss female company. Thomas can be good company, but most times, he's morose and likes to keep to himself. If Nellie had any remaining hopes that Thomas would want to court her, they ended with Laurie's words. He still deeply loved and missed his wife, even if Laurie could not see it. In the kitchen, Nellie helped Laurie prepare the midday meal, which was made easier because Laurie planned to heat up the previous night's stew. As they ate, they chatted easily. Nellie kept glancing at the clock on the wall of the kitchen. Thomas gets home at 5, Laurie offered. Nellie blushed. Laurie had read her thoughts well. In truth, a part of her wanted to see Thomas again, even though the other part of her was frightened. What about the children? She asked. They'll be back about 4 in the afternoon, Laurie said. The afternoon stretched before them. They ate their lunch at leisure, something that Nellie was not used to. At the hotel, she had gulped her lunch while working, as lunchtime was their busiest hour. Suddenly nostalgia filled her, and she longed for the comfort of Mrs. Price's familiar figure. I need to churn some butter. Do you want to help? It will keep your mind occupied, Laurie suggested, pushing her chair back. Yes, please, Nellie said. There was nothing like work to keep one from fretting. Nellie washed up the dishes while Laurie poured the cream into the churn and pounded it with a dasher to break up the fat. After Nellie was finished putting the dishes away, which took a while as she got to know where everything was kept, they took turns with the dasher, conversing easily as though they were old friends. Time rushed by and Nellie only realized it was 4 when the children came home from school. They looked sweet and flushed and scruffy carrying their satchels under their arms. Can we have some milk and biscuits? Peggy asked, dropping her satchel on the table. The house came alive with the children. The sounds of their laughter and an occasional mild argument broke the silence of the day. They were all laughing and chatting in the kitchen, the 2 women preparing supper, when Thomas walked in. Nellie sucked in her breath, and her mouth went cottony. She had forgotten just how handsome he was. He wore a white shirt underneath a brown suit that made him look so serious and so unattainable. His eyes lit up as the children rushed to him for a hug. Did you behave yourselves in school? He asked in a soft tone that touched Nellie's heart. Yes, Uncle Thomas, they chorused. Well, because of that, I have something for you, he said, dipping into his pockets. He gave each of the children 2 sweets and after shrieking with excitement, they scurried from the kitchen. You spoil them so, Thomas, Laurie said, her voice revealing just how grateful she was. They're wonderful children, Thomas replied, his voice wistful. Finally, he turned his attention to Nellie. Nellie didn't move, except to rub the back of her neck in an unconscious movement. And you? How was your day? He asked, his voice polite and formal. It was fine, Nellie said, barely getting the words out. Thankfully, Laurie spoke then, instructing Thomas to change out of his work clothes and have a cup of tea. I will, thanks, he said and turned to leave. Nellie's whole body relaxed when he left. How would she survive in the next few weeks, if every time she came face to face with Thomas she turned into an idiot? Chapter 5. Thank you for that, Laurie, Thomas said, wiping off his mouth with the back of his hand. Nellie kept her back firmly to him as she scrubbed the tea dishes. Here's the milking pail, Laurie said. I'm late with the chores today, and Bessie is going to be bellowing soon. Take Nellie with you. I'm sure she would enjoy seeing Bessie being milked. No. Don't force him, Laurie, Nellie's mind cried out. The silence stretched before Thomas answered. Very well, he said in a tone that told Nellie he wanted to spend as little time with her as possible. Perhaps another day. I want to finish washing up, Nellie responded. I'll finish up the washing myself, Laurie chirped and firmly held Nellie's shoulders, whirling her around. She winked at Nellie. Realizing her defeat, Nellie dried her hands on the white apron she wore, slipping on her coat, and trudged out after Thomas. His walk was stiff as he made for the pasture enclosure where Bessie spent her days. Bessie's good about being milked. She doesn't fight back as some cows do, Thomas said as he arranged a stool next to Bessie. He set the wooden bucket under the cow's teats. I suppose you haven't ever seen a cow being milked, Thomas continued. Standing a few steps away, Nellie smiled. Hardly. I have milked cows before. It was my job at the orphanage to milk the cows. Nellie's tone held an edge of pride. Thomas looked up, clearly surprised. I figured you for a city girl. Nellie shrugged. It was true that Boston was a big city, but the orphanage was a community of its own, away from the rest of the city. The people who ran the orphanage had aimed to make it as self-sufficient as they could. After some silence, Thomas spoke again. What happened to your parents? Nellie's heart constricted. She hated explaining the circumstances that had led her to live in the orphanage. She disliked the sympathy and pitying looks that followed. You don't have to tell me. I don't like speaking of Flora's death either, Thomas said, his voice thick. His understanding of what she felt almost undid her. Her heart ached that she would lose a kind man such as Thomas just because the timing had been all wrong. But perhaps, the timing would never be right for Thomas. From the little she had gathered, he was a man determined to mourn his wife for the rest of his life. I'm sorry about your wife. Had I known, I wouldn't have come, Nellie said. The squirts of milk splashing into the wooden bucket stopped. It's not your fault. It's Laurie's, Thomas said. She meant well, Nellie said softly. He sighed deeply, and the milk resumed splashing into the bucket. Understanding Thomas's perspective brought bittersweet feelings for Nellie, but it also made it easier to be around him. She sighed. Hopefully, her weeks spent there wouldn't be so difficult after all. Dinnertime was a lively affair. Nellie and Laurie listened as Thomas entertained the children with Christmas stories, giving them each a made-up original part for the children's benefit. It's bedtime, Laurie said from the sink where she was washing up the dinner dishes. After the children left, Laurie shooed the two of them out of the kitchen to the front room. I'll bring you some tea, she said. Nellie followed Thomas and chose the chair furthest from him. They sat gazing at each other, the earlier lightness gone. It was clear to both of them what Laurie was doing. If only she would stop, Nellie thought, it would make it so much easier. I promised Lori to stay for a couple of weeks. Till Christmas, really, and after that, I shall return to Boston, Nellie said. Thomas shot her a grateful look. He seemed to understand what she was really saying. She was no longer there to be his mail-order bride. When the month or so had passed, she would go back home, and they would each continue with their own lives. Nellie was glad she had gathered up the courage to speak up, for when Lori brought their tea and left them, claiming exhaustion, they exchanged a knowing smile. Nellie found herself revisiting the question he had asked her in the pasture. My parents didn't die, Nellie explained, fighting hard to control the emotions that overwhelmed her every time she spoke of her parents. Thomas didn't speak, he merely waited for her to continue. Nellie licked her dry lips. From what the people who ran the orphanage told me, my parents brought me in when I was newly born. They had 10 other children and were too poor to raise another. The orphanage only took in orphans, so they refused. Days afterward, I was found wrapped up in a blanket on the front porch of the orphanage. Shortly afterward, my parents and brothers and sisters disappeared. The effort of revisiting her history drained Nellie, and she sagged into the chair. They never came back to check on you? Thomas asked. She shook her head. She had waited every day for 18 years, peering down the dusty road for signs of a man and woman with 10 children. Thomas sighed. I suppose they knew if they came, they would have to take you with them. They must have thought it best to let you grow up with the knowledge that you would have a meal every day. Nellie blinked back her tears. For 18 years, she had wallowed in grief, thinking that they had not wanted her. She had never thought of it in the way Thomas looked at it. I'm sorry, he said simply, and she had the feeling that he really was. It can't have been easy for you, either, Nellie said. His expression clouded over. It hasn't been. The way Flora died is what pains me the most. The thought of her in agony during her last moments on earth. His voice caught. Nellie wished she had words that would soothe him. His eyes misted over, and his jaw visibly tightened. What happened to the owner of the horse? Nellie asked. The sheriff wanted to punish him, but I pleaded his case. The owner was innocent, and anyway, nothing would have brought Flora back. She was gone. While he spoke, strands of hair had fallen across his forehead, and now he weaved his fingers into his thick brown hair and smoothed them back. Nellie's heart warmed as she watched the simple movement. She felt an inexplicable urge to rearrange his hair for him. She swallowed past the lump in her throat. Thomas was easily the most attractive man she had ever seen, and he seemed unaware of his looks. Afraid that he would read her thoughts, she looked down at her lap. She was heavy with child, Thomas said, his voice trailing off. Nellie exhaled and felt guilty for the direction of her thoughts. Thomas was sinking in his grief, and there she was indulging in selfish feelings. Does it ever get easier? Nellie asked, for though she had lost her family, the fact was that she had not known them. In some ways, it does. Time has a way of taking away the worst burden of the pain, Thomas said. As soon as he spoke, he retreated into his shell. Nellie could see him emotionally back away and go to that place in himself where he was alone. Nellie, always attuned to people's feelings, was quite sure why he retreated. He didn't want to give her any hope that something could grow between the two of them. There's a kind of pain that never ever goes away, Nellie murmured. He looked at her and nodded. Then he stood up. Nellie wished there was something she could do to make him stay. Even if it was late, she felt reluctant to part with him. I'm glad we spoke, Thomas said, but she wondered if he meant it. I am, too, she said and stood. Thomas was taller than most men. She only reached his shoulders. He looked so vulnerable standing there. If only he were free to love, for Thomas would be an easy man to love. They said their goodnights, and as she padded down the hallway to her room, she knew that they had become friends of a sort. Chapter 6. By the time the next Sunday came around, Nellie had grown accustomed to Thomas's cautious ways. Lori made a point of turning in early at every opportunity and pushing them together. While this could have caused discomfort on her part, now Nellie simply enjoyed Thomas's company. Sometimes, they spent the evening quietly, each of them reading. Nellie glanced out at the changing weather in childish delight. The weather had turned overnight from clear and cool days to glittering drops of ice on the window and snow smattering the ground. She reached under the bed for her bag and fished out her heavy black coat. It would diminish the beauty of her green suit, the only smart outfit she owned, but it couldn't be helped. Holding up a small handheld mirror, Nellie scrutinized her face, disliking the side part of her hair. Tossing the mirror on the bed, she took out the white ribbon and brushed her hair down again. Lori chose that moment to knock on her door. "My, you look pretty," she said, entering the room. Nellie's face grew warm. "I wanted to smarten myself up for church." "You look pretty, too." "Thomas is coming with us," Lori said and shut the door behind her. Nellie already knew that. "That's lovely." "I think it's because of you, Nellie," Lori said and clapped her hands together. "He has never once attended a service since Flora left us. Not even Christmas last year. I told you he would like you once he got to know you." Nellie took Lori's hand and guided her toward the bed so they could both sit down. "Thomas is a wonderful person, Lori, but he's not ready to love or marry anyone else. He might never be ready. I'm only staying because I promised you I would, but there's no hope for me and Thomas. We are friends, though. And I do like him." Lori screwed her eyes. "Did he tell you that? That he'd never marry?" "Not in so many words, but yes. We're friends, Lori, and no more." "I'm sorry to hear that. I really hoped and prayed that something more could come of it." Her expression fell, and she fidgeted with her hands on her lap. "But I will stay as I promised you," Nellie said. Lori smiled at her. "I've loved having you here." She drew in a breath. "I'd really love having you as my sister-in-law." The air was cold as they walked to church. Every so often, Nellie threw a covert gaze at Thomas, admiring his ensemble of a crisp white shirt, a black coat, and creased trousers. Once, their eyes met over the children's heads, and she quickly averted her gaze, her heart pounding at the intensity of his stare. In the small but cozy church, she sat next to Thomas on the pew, conscious of his every movement and the warmth from his body. It was not surprising that after the service, she could recall very little of the sermon. "If you don't mind, I'll stay behind to attend the women's meeting for the Christmas program," Lori said when they were all huddled outside. "Do you want to stay with me, Nellie?" Nellie shook her head. "I'll go back with the children. Just let me know if you need my help, and I'll be happy to oblige." The children said goodbye to their mother, and the four of them proceeded home, Peggy holding on to Nellie's hand on one side, and Thomas's on the other. Caleb danced around behind them. "You could have stayed if you wanted to," Thomas said. "I'd have seen to the children. There's no point in becoming too involved with the ladies when I only have a couple more weeks here," Nellie explained, her heart twisting at her looming departure. She waited, hoping that Thomas would say something. But it was foolish to hope. He didn't say one thing to her comment. Her steps grew heavier, and she fought the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. She had not been honest with Lori or herself. The truth was that she desperately hoped Thomas would open his heart to her. Throwing a quick glance at his profile, she saw his nonchalant walk and pleasant features, depicting a man who was confident and at ease. "Pa!" Caleb shouted. Peggy's hand slipped out of Nellie's, and the girl shot off toward the house. A burly man stood on the porch, a wide grin on his face. Thomas quickened his step, too, but Nellie followed at a more sedate pace. The children threw themselves into their father's arms, and then he and Thomas shook hands. When Nellie reached them, Peggy was still hanging onto her pa's leg. The joy on the children's faces lifted her own spirits. "Simon, meet Miss Nellie Wilder. She's a friend of Lori's," Thomas said. His words of introduction cut deep. Nellie felt as though she'd been rejected all over again. She silently scolded herself. What had she expected? Thomas continually seemed to do his best to disassociate himself from her. She forced a smile to her face. Simon's mouth broadened with a warm grin, and his eyes lit up. "It is a pleasure, Miss Wilder. Any friend of Lori's is most welcome here." Thank you, Nellie murmured and then excused herself to see to their noon meal. She hurried to the kitchen where she stood for a moment gripping the edge of the counter. Her breath came out in shallow bursts. She'd been too blind to realize what was staring her right in the face. She had allowed herself to fall for Thomas. She rolled her eyes and moaned. What a fool she was. With tight lips, she went about lighting the stove and cooking their meal. Delighted hollers from the front room told her when Laurie returned home. After several minutes, the woman burst into the kitchen, her face pink and flushed. Nellie, my Simon is home, she exclaimed. Nellie grinned at her. I'm happy for you and the children. It must be wonderful to see him after so long. Oh, it is. And now he can help decorate the house for Christmas. I know he'll be going off again later, but I won't let myself think of that now. They chatted as they set the kitchen table. The church needs a new roof, and at the women's meeting, we agreed that each of us would bake something for a sale to raise money, Laurie said. I'd like to help. I thought you would. We'll have the big sale right before Christmas, but from now onward, there'll be baked foods for sale after each service. Nellie had been reluctant to think much about Christmas, but now thoughts of the family day assailed her mind. Now that she had admitted her feelings about Thomas to herself, maybe it would be best if she did return to Boston before Christmas. Being there with Thomas at Christmas time might be too hard. What is it? Laurie asked. You look like someone just died. I'm all right, Nellie said, shaking her head and smiling. Laurie's hands went to her hips as she faced her. You're full of secrets, Nellie. Don't you know that your heart has only so much it can bear? Nellie frowned. Me? I don't keep secrets. Yes, you do, Laurie insisted. You never talk about your past or how you grew up, and whenever I ask, you become tight-lipped. Nellie averted her gaze. It was true that she liked to keep her personal history private. Yet, it had been easy to pour her heart out to Thomas. This is about Thomas, ain't it? Nellie could no longer keep her emotions under control. She nodded glumly. The subject of their conversation walked in at that very moment, followed by Simon's heavy steps. Chapter 7. I've dreamt of this for many long, cold days, Simon said, wiping stray pieces of food from his mouth. Eating a meal prepared by my wife again. He placed his large hand over Laurie's, and his eyes bore into hers. Unspoken words passed between them, and they smiled at each other. Nellie looked away, feeling as if she were witnessing a very private moment. She glanced at Thomas. He fidgeted in his seat, locked eyes with her, and then glanced away. A loud burp broke the silence, and the children broke out into giggles. Simon. Laurie admonished, a small smile on her face. We have a visitor. Simon turned to look at Nellie apologetically. Forgive my awful bad manners, Miss Wilder. Nellie chuckled. It's all right. And for goodness sakes, please call me Nellie. I want to get on with chopping firewood for the winter tomorrow morning, first thing, Simon said. I wish I could help, Thomas said. But I have to go to the ranch and see that everything is as it should be. The Oliver family has moved out. There were exclamations of surprise. They've bought their own piece of land north of the ranch. Janet Oliver must be so pleased, Laurie said. A discussion followed on the Oliver family, while Nellie took the opportunity to sit back and observe Thomas. He seemed animated, and every so often, he and Simon roared with laughter. It was wonderful to see him so relaxed and at ease. Will you lease it out again? Laurie asked. Thomas was thoughtful for a while. I think not. My mind's telling me it's time to go back home. You're welcome to stay longer if you wish, Simon said. Please stay, Laurie pleaded. We feel safer with you here, especially with Simon away so much. Let the man make up his mind in peace, Simon admonished his wife in a light tone. Besides, I'm thinking of resigning and setting up my own store right here in Plum River. There are so many settlers coming in and a lot of demand for tools. Laurie's mouth fell open. Truly? Hold your horses now, Simon said, grinning. I ain't quite made up my mind yet. I'd be happy to invest some of my funds in your business, Thomas said. Simon banged on the table. Now, that gives it a whole different perspective. I shall accompany you to the ranch, and we can discuss it some more. Why don't you let Nellie go with him? She hasn't been out much, and I'm sure she would love to see it, Laurie said. There'll be time enough to discuss business. Simon looked confused, shifting his eyes from Laurie to Thomas and finally to Nellie. He shrugged. You're right. Besides, I could do with some rest. I thought I'd go tomorrow, Thomas interjected. Nonsense. Nothing better than a drive on a Sunday afternoon, Laurie commented. Just bundle up good and tight. Laurie smiled happily and pushed her hair back. I have some presents for the two of you, Simon told Peggy and Caleb. He laughed at their exuberant response. Maybe, I'd better wait till Christmas. Despite knowing that Thomas had no romantic interest in her, Nellie's heart missed a beat at the thought of spending the next few hours with him. She shot Laurie a grateful look as she went to her room to fetch her coat and muffler. How far is it? Nellie asked as Thomas helped her into the wagon. About 5 miles, Thomas said and settled himself on the driver's seat next to her. The snow has cleared, so it should be an easy journey. The wagon jostled and shook over the deeply rutted road that led away from town. At first, they passed several people in wagons and on horseback, each waving at Thomas. You know everyone here in Plum River, Nellie commented, the wind in her hair. The seemingly endless prairie stretched out on both sides. Thomas laughed, a deep sound that came from his belly. She could listen to him laugh all day without tiring of it. I count myself as one of the earlier settlers here. Simon and Laurie followed several years later. What made you settle on Wyoming? Nellie asked, curious about his past. I was young, and I wanted a different life away from the city where Laurie and I were raised. I longed for a ranch of my own where I would maybe have a few cattle and grow my own food. So, did you have cattle and grow your food? Quiet ensued, and Nellie wondered if she had ruined the good mood between them. I did for a while. I worked at the bank, and Flora and the foreman saw to the ranch. We ended up with a small herd of 10 cattle. After she passed on, I couldn't do it. It wasn't the same without her, Thomas explained in a matter-of-fact voice. I couldn't handle it all alone. Not with my bank job, too. A more or less comfortable silence ensued as Nellie enjoyed the occasional splash of green peeking through the patches of snow on the vast grasslands. Oh, look, she cried out. Ahead on the right side was an inviting stand of pines. Their deep green was so arresting, Nellie stared. Can we stop and take a closer look? She asked. Thomas grinned. I remember the first time I came this way. There wasn't much of a road then. Those pines captured my attention, too. He brought the wagon to a halt by the side of the road and after jumping down, he helped Nellie down. They touched, and Nellie felt as though she had been brushed with a live ember. There's a stream beyond the pines, Thomas said. In truth, I've stopped here before. It shouldn't be iced over yet. Nellie nodded. His touch had flustered her, and she was glad when he turned away and forged a path through the grass. Are there snakes? She asked as the frozen grass rustled the hem of her skirts. Might be, Thomas said. Too cold, though. And they're not harmful. They will only wrap themselves around your leg, nothing to be frightened of. Thomas. He laughed. You're safe with me, Nellie. Her heart lurched at his playful tone of voice. But was she? Was she safe with him? His simple words made her legs go weak. She did feel safe with Thomas, almost as if he were her protector. Nellie shook her head. These kinds of thoughts would only bring heartbreak, she chided herself. Oh, this is lovely. I wish we had thought to bring a picnic, Nellie said, bubbling in childish delight when she sighted the swiftly moving stream. Too cold for a picnic. Perhaps another time, Thomas said. Would there be another time? Nellie bent to touch the water. In the springtime, she could imagine waiting here with her skirts hitched up. Thomas chuckled. You can't be thinking of touching that icy water? I am, and I have an inkling you want to do the same. Unlike you, I know my hands would freeze, and it would take hours to warm them up. Don't be such a chicken, Nellie teased. Thomas's eyes widened comically. Did you just call me chicken? I'll have you know, Miss Wilder, that in addition to my prowess with horses, I was awarded a prize for the boy who could run the fastest against the biggest kids in my school. Is that so? Then a dip in the icy water shouldn't frighten you, should it? Nellie said. She had never flirted with a man before, but it felt right with Thomas. Fun. Daring. His eyes glistened as he contemplated her dare. All right then, but what do I get in return? Nellie's heart pounded against her chest. A kiss on the cheek. His eyes darkened and for a moment she thought she had offended him. You have yourself a deal, he said. He peeled off his leather gloves, knelt down on the frozen ground by the bank of the river, and plunged both hands into the frigid water. She saw his face blanch with the cold, but he kept them submerged for nearly a full minute. You can take them out, she cried. You'll get frostbite. He pulled his hands out, and she saw they'd already gone white. He wiped them rapidly on his jacket and quickly put his gloves back on. He moved to her, until he loomed before her, his eyes dark and intense on hers. Her heart raced as he bent close and pressed his mouth to her cheek. His lips were cold and firm and steady. He lingered a bit longer than she thought he would, and her breathing went shallow. Now really, you should be kissing me, he whispered in her ear, his tone low and thick. She swallowed past the knot of emotion in her throat. She stretched up, and her lips gently whisked across his skin. No, 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 he softly admonished. I had my hands in that frozen river for a good 10 minutes. I want more than that. She giggled. 10 minutes? I don't think so. But nonetheless, she reached up and kissed him again, her face going hot. Confusion swirled through her. He acted as though they were courting. But they weren't, were they? When she pulled away, she looked at him, wanting to read whatever was in his eyes. But it was too late. He'd gone stiff on her, so quickly that it seemed as if he'd closed some kind of a door. Shall we go? He didn't wait for her answer, he was already walking away. She scurried to catch up with him. Chapter 8. Nellie had gotten used to the easy camaraderie of the family and now she sat back, sipping her tea, indulging in her favorite pastime of watching Thomas. Everything about him intrigued her, from the way he wrapped his tea mug with both hands to how his brow creased when he was deep in thought. I was thinking perhaps we can bake cornbread for the travelers who pass by, Laurie said, cutting into her thoughts. Nellie turned to her, her face warm. Yes, that sounds like a fine idea. Word will be given to everyone that there'll be baked food for sale, Laurie continued. We can also make apple pies, Nellie offered, remembering that they had returned from Thomas's ranch laden with apples from the cellar. Laurie clapped. Good thinking, Nellie. We shall leave you two ladies to it, and get on our way, Simon said. Go on, children, get your satchels. Before leaving, Thomas's eyes bore into hers and something intense passed between them that stole her breath. Let's have another mug of tea. There's time enough to see to the chores, Laurie suggested and poured them both more tea. What did you think of Thomas's ranch? She asked Nellie, leaning forward in her seat. I have never seen anything like it, Nellie murmured. At first glance, she had thought Thomas was mistaken when they'd stopped in front of the ranch house. It was a two-story, with wide porches both above and below that were supported by huge columns. Thomas got the design from an architect friend of his back east, and I must say he put his whole heart and soul into it, Laurie confided. He loves it. That was easy to tell. I'm surprised he ever left it. After Flora, it was just too hard. I could tell it had a woman's touch. Everything was so cozy and warm and inviting. Nellie neglected to mention how much she'd love to live there. She would honor Flora's memory, too, and not change much of anything. In truth, Nellie thought the place was perfect. The sound of the door interrupted their conversation. They both glanced up, startled, as heavy footsteps made toward the kitchen. "It's me," Simon's voice called before his bulky frame filled the doorway. Lori scrambled to her feet. "Is everything all right?" "We have to leave, Lori," Simon said, his features solemn. "I just got word by messenger that Ma is poorly. The neighboring family sent it, and they say they can't get Ma to see sense." "But what's wrong?" Lori asked, her voice laced with concern. "She hasn't seen the doctor, stubborn old woman. She's bullheaded, that one. She's got a bad croup. Real bad. We need to go." "I got to talk some sense into her," Simon complained, but the worry in his tone was evident. "Now? We have to leave now?" Lori stood up. "Yes, woman, we have to leave now. You can see to things at Ma's, and I'll get her to the doctor. We shouldn't have to stay more than a couple days. But the children will miss school." Nellie stood. "No, they won't," she said. "I'm here. Leave them with me." Lori turned to Nellie. "That's asking a lot of you." "Not at all. And you didn't ask." "I offered." "I'll mind the children, don't fret." "Go on and see to your mother," Nellie said, addressing both of them. In 20 minutes, Lori was done packing, and they set off with the wagon. Lori shouted last-minute instructions until the wagon disappeared from view. Nellie turned back and went into the house. It already felt oddly empty without Lori's constant chatter. She had come to rely on the other woman for conversation and friendly support. The hours dragged by as she moved aimlessly from room to room until 2 o'clock when she decided to get on with the evening meal. Thoughts of Thomas fleeted in and out of her mind. She imagined him at the bank where he worked in his office, solemnly studying columns of figures. As soon as Nellie saw the children's small figures strolling down the driveway, her spirits lifted. She greeted them on the porch. "Where's Ma?" Caleb asked. "Her and your pa had to go and visit your granny. She's feeling a bit poorly and needs their help," Nellie explained, deciding to tell them the truth. "Don't fret. They'll be back in a few days. In the meantime, we'll be together and everything will be as usual." They didn't seem overly worried, their main concern being whether there was something they could eat. "Come along," Nellie said, smiling. "I made oatcakes for after supper, but you can have some now with milk." Nellie could not keep a grin from her face at the expression of glee that followed her words. With the children in the house, time flew by, and she didn't once think of Thomas before she saw him appear in the kitchen. "Howdy," Thomas said in a loud voice that made the children giggle. Nellie smiled, feeling uncharacteristically shy. "Where are Lori and Simon?" "He had said he would pass by the bank today, but he never did," Thomas asked, shrugging out of his coat. Without thinking, Nellie stepped forward and took his coat and immediately felt foolish. Why was she behaving like his wife? Thomas didn't seem to find the gesture odd, though. He merely handed it to her and flashed her a grateful smile. He got word that his ma was unwell, so he and Lori went to see to her, Nellie explained. His brow creased. "I hope it's nothing serious. Will you manage by yourself?" Nellie nodded. "Of course, I will. I took care of a lot of children back at the orphanage." "What's an orphanage, Miss Nellie?" Peggy piped. Nellie's stomach churned at the innocent question. How did one explain to children brought up in a loving household made up of 2 parents, about a place for parentless children? "An orphanage is a home for children who have lost their parents," Thomas said, coming to her rescue. "Where were your parents, Miss Nellie?" Caleb asked solemnly. "That's a story for another day. Now go on and play or read a book," Thomas said, taking control of the situation. "Thank you," Nellie said quietly after the children trooped out. "It was no bother," Thomas said, his voice gentle. "Can a thirsty man impose for a cup of tea?" "Yes, of course. I should have offered." Thomas excused himself to change out of his work clothes. Nellie realized she was still holding his coat. She brought it to her nose and inhaled deeply. It smelled clean and fresh and exactly like Thomas. She closed her eyes and hugged the coat to her for a long moment. Thomas's heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway snapped her back to her senses. She hung the coat and proceeded to pour tea into 2 cups from the kettle on the stove. "How was your day?" Nellie asked when he returned. She handed him his tea. "The same as yesterday," Thomas said. "You don't enjoy working at the bank?" Nellie asked, eager to learn everything about him. "My dream was to be a rancher until Flora's death," he said, without batting an eyelid. He sat down at the table. "Going to the ranch yesterday rekindled my dream. I'll probably work at the bank for a few more years and then quit and work the ranch." Nellie swallowed and bit on her lower lip to keep it from trembling. It was foolish to be so emotional about Thomas. Yet, it disappointed her when he spoke of his future, and she was nowhere in it. She gulped down her tea, relishing the hot liquid on her throat. "It must be nice to have your future all planned out," Nellie said before she could stop herself. Thomas looked at her, startled. She momentarily shut her eyes. Why did she have to say that? It wasn't his fault that he wasn't interested in getting married. "I apologize. I should have kept quiet," Nellie said. "I understand why you said it, but it's not as simple as you imagine." He ran his hand over his chin. "I've always longed for a family of my own. I'm not looking forward to living at the ranch house by myself." "You don't have to. I'm right here." Nellie bowed her head. She was in danger of begging him to love her. Thomas coughed as if he just realized what he'd said. He stood and looked around as if momentarily lost. Then he set his still full cup of tea on the counter and left the room. Chapter 9. "You're home early," Nellie said, when Thomas appeared from the side of the house the next day. She gathered up an armful of firewood and smiled at him. Pleasure flushed through her. Against the backdrop of the weak sunshine, he looked so handsome and formal in his black suit. "I took a few days off work," Thomas explained. "I reckoned I was due for time off, and you could do with some help around here." "That's very thoughtful of you." He took the wood from her. "I'll change out of these clothes and make myself useful." Nellie nodded happily. It was only 2 o'clock, and the afternoon, which had stretched out endlessly before her, now promised to be a pleasant time. Thomas returned moments later wearing a pair of dark work trousers and a heavy shirt. She was still at the woodpile, gathering up another armload. He nodded at her and went into the shed, emerging seconds later carrying a hatchet. She watched him as he pulled out a log from a huge stack and placed it on a chopping block. His muscles strained against the back of his shirt as he lifted the hatchet and brought it down. He was so beautiful. Nellie turned abruptly and carried the armload of wood into the house. Back in the kitchen, she continued glancing outside while she saw to dinner. She felt intoxicated by a feeling she had never had before, but whatever it was, it made her giddy with joy at having Thomas so close. It was the second day for the children without their mother, and they seemed to feel her absence more. "When is Ma coming back?" Peggy asked, her sweet features screwed into a frown. "Your parents will be back home soon," Thomas said, smiling at her reassuringly. "Meanwhile, Miss Nellie and I are here to take care of you." The man would make a fine father. The thought popped up from nowhere, and Nellie's face heated at the direction of her thoughts. "Now finish up dinner, and I'll read you a story from the Bible before bedtime," Thomas instructed the children. As she cleaned up, Nellie listened to Thomas's deep voice wafting in from the front room. She wiped off her hands just as he was winding up the story. "Time for bed," Nellie said. They got up, rubbing their eyes, and bid their uncle good night. They shared the last room down the hallway, and Nellie tucked them into bed. "Will you pray with us?" Peggy asked. "Certainly. Let's pray." Nellie said a quick prayer of thanks for the day and for the children's parents' safety. She ended with thanks that Peggy and Caleb had a loving home. "Ma doesn't pray that way, Miss Nellie," Peggy said. "Don't be such an idiot, Peggy," Caleb growled. "It's all right. People say different prayers, just the same way you and Caleb don't think alike," Nellie explained. But you should always remember to give the good Lord thanks for having good parents and a home. Yes, Miss Nellie, they murmured, their voices already heavy with sleep. Nellie tiptoed out. In the hallway, she bumped into Thomas and nearly shrieked. He was leaning against the wall. His hands shot out and grabbed her about the waist to steady her. It was not the first time he had touched her, but the unexpectedness of it and the dimness of the hall made her weak. Eavesdropping? Nellie teased to cover the intensity of her emotions. One day, you'll make a wonderful mother, Thomas said, his eyes blazing with an emotion she could not identify. Thank you, Nellie said softly. Let's have some tea before bed, Thomas suggested. Nellie was glad for the respite. She fled to the kitchen, and as she waited for the kettle to boil, her mind went over his words. One day you'll make a wonderful mother. Did he ever picture her as the mother of his children, or would that image forever belong to Flora? Carrying both their cups, Nellie went to the front room and served him his tea before carefully picking a seat angled toward him. Laurie is lucky to have you, Thomas said. She's a good friend, and I'm glad I can pay back her kindness, Nellie said. Thomas shifted in his seat and refused to meet her stare. It lay unspoken between them. She had not come because she was Laurie's friend, she had come to Wyoming because she was to be his mail-order bride. Nellie's pulse quickened and a flash of anger overtook her. Why was Thomas refusing to acknowledge that she had come to Plum River to be his wife? I'm thinking of placing an advert myself, Nellie said, her voice under tight control. Oh? Thomas said, clearly startled by her declaration. I don't want to return to Boston to the same life I had before coming here, so it makes sense to continue searching, Nellie said, hoping, praying, for a reaction. Thomas kept his countenance pleasant and undisturbed, seemingly not concerned with what she was saying. You're a special lady, Nellie. A gentleman will snatch you up before too long. Nellie almost spat out her tea. Knowing she would burst into tears at any moment, she unsteadily got to her feet. I've had a rather long day, she said. Thomas tilted his head and frowned. I was looking forward to our evening chat. It was on the tip of Nellie's mouth to retort that she was fed up with chats that were getting her nowhere. The only thing that held her back was pride. During her life, she'd gone through much more painful emotions than a man's disinterest, and she wasn't about to expose her weakness to him now. She forced a smile. I feel rather tired. I understand. Have a good night, Thomas said and reached for the Bible on the table, effectively dismissing her. Tears welled in her eyes which erupted into full sobs as soon as she closed the door to her room. What was the matter with her? What decent woman threw herself at a gentleman, which was what she had been doing since she arrived? It was enough, Nellie decided. She was done with Thomas. It was time she accepted that he had no interest whatsoever in her. Chapter 10. Nellie pounded the dough harder than necessary. She felt like a piece of elastic pulled back so tightly, it would snap at any moment. The strain of keeping a cheerful countenance was too much, and the muscles on her face tugged at her skin. Nellie, are you all right? Nellie jumped as though she had been stung. She hadn't heard Thomas come into the kitchen. You seem different the last couple of days. Thomas's voice sounded so caring that she had to remind herself that he was a good person, and his concern was not a manifestation of his feelings. I'm all right, she said, without looking at him. She could not bear to gaze into those eyes that still carried the shadow of the love he had for his late wife. The children and I are going to milk Bessie, he explained. Good. I'm going to make some Christmas pudding. She looked at the pine boughs she'd placed around, trying to give the house a festive air. She heard the clunk of the milking bucket and Thomas's steps as he left. She exhaled heavily when he was gone. She had woken up in a sorrowful mood. Perhaps it was the snowflakes on the window that she had woken up to that morning, signaling the fact that Christmas was drawing nearer. Whatever the reason, she was now convinced that she had to leave Plum River. As soon as Simon and Laurie came home, she'd talk with Laurie and make arrangements for the purchase of her ticket. Self-pity flooded her as she transferred the dough to a glass bowl to rise, her movements automatic. Just then, the front door creaked open, and Peggy and Caleb came running in. Miss Nellie, We asked Uncle Thomas if we can slide around on the frozen puddles down by the river, and he said to ask you, Caleb said breathlessly. And don't worry none. We done it before. Lots of times. Too tired to give it deeper thought, Nellie simply nodded, but she did remember to warn them about the time. Don't stay long or go far, she said. And stay away from the river. Puddles only. She stood staring into space. Nellie wasn't sure how long she stood there. It was Thomas returning from milking Bessie who roused her from her state of nothingness. Laurie and Simon should be back soon, he told her. I hope his ma is all right. They said they'd only be gone a few days, Nellie said. So yes, they should be here any time now. All this must be tiring for you. I imagine you want to return to the excitement of the city. Nellie whirled around to face him, her whole body suddenly breathing fire. Before she could say a word, he turned and left the kitchen. She seethed. He had no right to imply that she was tired of looking after the children. Or to make her feel unwelcome. It wasn't his house, and Laurie had said she could stay as long as she wanted. After venting in her mind, all the fight left Nellie and she slumped onto a chair. The truth was that she had invaded the place Thomas called home, and he had every right to want her gone. As soon as Laurie was back, she would be on her way just like she'd planned. And as quickly as possible. The front door creaked open again. Oh good, you're back, Nellie said to Caleb. Where's Peggy? She's still at the frozen puddles. I told her it was time to come home, but she wouldn't come, Caleb explained. Nellie pushed back her chair. I shall go and fetch her myself. Can I take you, Miss Nellie? Caleb asked. I know right where she is. I would appreciate that, Nellie said and ruffled his mop of brown hair, which seemed to run in the family. She fetched her coat and her boots, and in a short while they were stomping down toward the river. The wind had picked up and was howling through the naked branches of the trees. Nellie's stomach tightened. She had not used wisdom in allowing the children out on their own. This was no weather for children to be playing outside in. She quickened her step. Miss Nellie, Peggy ain't here. Caleb shouted above the wind. I left her right there, he said, pointing ahead. Her eyes strained to see ahead and then moved over the water. She saw a huge log caught in the water and before her gaze shifted, she thought she saw a small figure. Nellie's heart blasted against her ribs. Peggy, she screamed. Frenzied, she dashed to the edge of the river. She was ready to plunge into the frigid water when she realized it was not a body floating on the log, but a broken branch. She gasped in relief, her eyes searching the area. Peggy, she screamed again. Caleb joined her, yelling for his sister. Over here, came a feeble reply. Nellie ran toward the small voice. Peggy. Where are you? Peggy. Keep hollering. Here, came the voice again. Here. Nellie. Nellie rounded a thick stand of trees and saw Peggy lying under a large branch. Nellie raced to her and knelt down on the frozen ground. Are you hurt? What happened? She cried. My leg hurts, Peggy whined, tears streaming down her red, chapped cheeks. I can't move the branch. Nellie yanked on the branch which had obviously just cracked off a tree. It had somehow wedged itself beneath the protruding roots of another tree. Nellie yanked hard, but it wouldn't budge. My leg hurts, Peggy cried. I'm here, love, I'm right here, Nellie said. We'll get it. Don't worry. Caleb joined her, tugging with all his might. Nellie. Peggy. What's going on? Nellie could have wept when she heard Thomas's deep voice calling out. Thank the Lord. She brushed the dirt from her face and saw him then, his strong form moving purposefully as he ran to them. I've got it, he said, taking a firm hold of the heavy branch. On 3, we'll all tug, all right? At the count of 3, they all groaned and tugged with all their might. The branch came loose, and the 3 of them toppled to the ground. Even in her pain, Peggy giggled. You all fell. Within minutes, Peggy was snuggled against Thomas's shoulder. "I'm sorry I didn't come home," she said. "That branch came flying at me." Unable to speak for fear of weeping, Nellie touched the girl's cheek in a gesture of comfort. "Come, let's go home before all of us catch death from the cold," Thomas said. He held Peggy tightly as they all hustled back home. By the time they got back into the house, Nellie had regained her breath and took charge, drying Peggy and placing her near the fire in the hearth. She gently inspected the child's hurt leg. She cleansed the scratches, washed the blood away, and wrapped it gently. "You think it's broken?" she asked Thomas. "I don't think so. Just bruised. We'll check it again when the swelling goes down." In her room, Nellie quickly stripped off her muddy clothes, still trembling from head to foot. She felt marginally better in clean clothes. A knock sounded on her door before it was pushed open and Thomas entered. He had never been in her room, and his presence filled every inch of the small space. He looked ruggedly handsome, his face creased with lines of worry. "Nellie, you scared me to death today," he said. "I couldn't find you. I couldn't find the children. I would never ever have forgiven myself if something worse had happened to any of you. I never should have let the children wander about by themselves. It was an accident. Plain and simple. Lori lets the kids wander about all the time." He grew solemn. "But that isn't what I meant." She looked at him. Something about his expression caused her breath to catch in her throat. He looked different, somehow. Ragged. Spent. "What is it?" she whispered. He blinked at her and took 2 deep breaths. "I was worried. It's all right now." She had an overwhelming urge to walk into his arms, but she wouldn't dare. He gazed at her, looking into her eyes as if he hungered to see her very soul. "No," he said. "It's not all right now. Not if you leave." She gasped, and he went on. "I never expected to love anyone else after Flora, but Lord help me, I was wrong." He ran his hand through his hair. "I love you, Nellie. I love you with every fiber of my being. I can't let you go." Nellie's lips parted in wonder. Then the most incredulous joy filled her heart. She gave a small yelp and ran to him. "He loves me," she thought as she was enclosed in his embrace. She wrapped her arms around his neck as Peggy had done earlier and clung to him. After a while, he pulled back slightly, keeping his arms around her. Can you care for me?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. Before answering, Nellie did what she had longed to do since she first met him. She cupped both of his cheeks in her hands, feeling the manly roughness of his whiskers. "I can," Nellie said. "I have loved you for weeks now." Thomas smiled sheepishly. "I'm sorry it took so long to accept that I was destined to love you." He took her hands into his big ones. "Will you marry me, Nellie Wilder?" Nellie smiled, scarcely daring to believe what was happening. "I will." He touched his forehead to hers. "It shall be a Christmas wedding." Small footsteps ran down the hallway, and she heard Caleb's voice shouting loud enough for all of Plum River to hear. "Peggy! Miss Nellie and Uncle Thomas is getting married." The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susanna Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susanna Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susanna Calloway Western romance.